Pat McDonald, there truly is nostalgia like nostalgia, and we're back again
Yes.
talking about a classic movie from the fours. We're specializing on years that end in four because this is 2024. Now we're flashing back to 1994. It's hard to believe it's been 30 years since Terry Zwigoff's Crumb came out, but here we are. We got a Blu-ray edition from Criterion. Whoever thought that would happen?
Oh, wow.
But it's a celebrated documentary. It was up until very recently one of my favorite documentaries, and I still love it. But watching
What
this
is supplanted?
age, watching this now as a middle-aged man, I'm like, I
Oh my God,
definitely
I can't even
appreciate Crumb
imagine.
as an artist. I love Crumb. He's been a huge influence on my
Oh,
own art.
sure.
But just as a person, I really zeroed in on watching him and watching his family and thinking, man, that guy's messed up. But perhaps in all the best ways.
Well, yeah, we'll get into that, but I have to go back and say I hadn't seen it since it came out. So
Wow.
we're talking
Okay.
about a 30-year gap. It was very, very interesting to note what I remembered from my initial viewing and what I didn't remember. And there was a lot more that I didn't remember, obviously.
Things you blocked out, or just
Well, yeah,
forgot?
probably from the torturous first viewing. Yes. I don't know. I'm very fascinated with dysfunctional families, so they really take the cake on that.
Well, that's the thing, is that's something that I think discovered for the first time. I guess you can only discover something for the first time. Um, I've seen this movie probably 5 times, in the
Okay,
last 3 decades, because I mentioned Crumb is a huge influence on me.
sure.
But I didn't put it together until this viewing that the movie is called Crumb. It's not called Our Crumb. This movie really is about the Crumb
Yes,
family and
yes,
what it did to at least the three boys who came out of
yeah,
that family. There were two sisters who refused to be interviewed, for the documentary, but they were all artists. One of them became this underground comics and pop cultural superstar, and the others, had their own, achievements in various ways, except for, I guess, Charles, the oldest brother, who never quite made it out of mom's bedroom or house. That sounded really weird.
What was distinctive about Maxon,
Yeah,
Maxon,
Maxon.
Maxoff?
Hmm.
He was he was he a notable artist? I thought he was just an institution of some sort. He looked like he was in a halfway house.
It did, but I'm saying, like, and perhaps I misspoke. He didn't achieve like fame or notoriety, but he was definitely supremely talented from
Right.
the works that we do see in
Yeah,
the movie. I mean,
absolutely.
Zwigoff's documentary and ours, exposure of his brother's work to the world might be, I don't know if anything happened because of that or whatever, but looking
Right.
at this art, it's definitely you can see that kind of familial style interwoven in it, but it's also very different. It's very kind of painterly and out there.
Well, that brings up an interesting question, and especially to you as a fine artist. What do you think that is in the DNA? Do you think that with our genetics, a ability to draw or you look at something with perspective and interpret it on the page is passed along in genetics?
I can't speak to that. I mean, if this documentary is anything to go by, perhaps. Well, that's the thing, is like, because it's a very interesting question. I don't know that, if, since I'm an artist, if I have kids who have the natural ability to draw. I mean, I like to
Right.
think that my boys do and they like drawing, but I would say it's more in terms of creativity and imagination. Like for myself, I'm an illustrator, I'm a graphic artist, but I
Right.
also do podcasting and digital art and all this other stuff. I have to find an outlet for my creativity, and that takes me all sorts of crazy places. It's not
Sure.
just like pen
I
and ink
know that
drawings.
very well. I know that very
Right.
well. Yeah.
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 So it's a
My
blessing and a
my
curse.
sister can draw very well. My dad could draw very well. My grandfather could draw very well, but I don't think anybody else in our chain could do that.
Is that, I wonder if that's because were they taught and encouraged? Did they practice a lot in a way that perhaps the people in your family who didn't get that drawing
Right.
gene weren't encouraged or didn't practice a lot, didn't
Well,
make it a calling?
and then you bring up another great point that the practice of fine art is based on the ability to sit down for 12 hours with something. Now, I've never had that gene, never. So who knows? I mean, I liked the cartoon when I was a kid. I really understand their fascination with comics and comic strips, because I had that as a kid as myself, and I actually tried to draw like strip cartooning, but of course I can't draw to save my life, so I kind of had the disinterest after that. Now, Gary Trudeau, who does Doonesbury, could not draw a line, but he would just draw what he drew, and it was his wit and power of words that got that thing off the ground. Now he doesn't everybody else draws it. No, he doesn't at all. And that was one of the secrets of cartoonists that I never knew until I was an adult, that they actually hired people to mock their style, and then they didn't have to do it all the time. And Schultz didn't do it, but a lot of the others, Al Cap, I know, had people, and it was fascinating to me.
Yeah, I mean, it essentially it turns into a brand and then kind of a machine and an empire,
Right,
which, that's one of the things that's so fascinating about Crumb is, the documentary, for anyone who hasn't watched it, first turn this off and go watch it and then come back.
Turn this off in the middle of my sentence. Turn it off.
As much as I appear to rag on it at the beginning, because there is some disturbing material in
Very
here.
disturbing, very disturbing. And I have a question about that, but go ahead.
Okay, but I mean, just as far as looking at the life of an artist who developed his own style, didn't have any kind of classical artist training, but basically
Right.
grew up under the tutelage of an older brother who basically roped his entire family into making homemade comics and then getting kind of obsessed with that. And then he came up around the time of the hippie counterculture in the early 60s. And next thing you know, he's doing, album covers for Janis Joplin and whatever. It's a fascinating study of the work and the man.
That's one of the things I remembered from the doc, when he's doing that little lecture and he goes, here's what I'm known for. Keep on trucking, Fritz the Cat, and Janis Joplin's album. He was
right, and that's
$600 for that album, and he said it was sold for 21,000. I bet it's worth $1 million now, easy.
Oh, I'm sure. I was surprised. It went for that low back in 1991 or whenever this was filmed.
Same here, man. But you have to remember that was on the decline of the album. So, that was during the CD revolution, and the albums were just like disposable back then. That's why they came back, because suddenly they weren't available anymore.
Right.
Rediscovered them. When I go into a store and see an album that I bought for literally $3.99 at Discount Den in Bloomington, Indiana, to find that it's now $45 new, you're just like, what kind of economy is this? Do we live in Berlin in 1929?
Well, I mean, you've got a few years ago, it goes from Jack White of the White Stripes having his own boutique record pressing label to try and save the art form to, hey, now Target is selling not only record players but albums. It's nuts. But the commodification of the art form. But what I was getting to, and I'm glad you reminded me because I lost my train of thought for a second, is he talks about these experiences with these brush with things that got commercial success that didn't necessarily net him any money. It mostly netted him annoyance, because forever now he's going to be the, hey, keep on trucking guy. But we also see throughout the movie him taking phone calls of very clearly someone saying, hey, we want to make not a Fritz, a Mr. Natural movie, another one of his characters, and we're going to give you an ungodly sum of money for the rights to it. Will you do it? Don't even have to participate. We just want to do it. And he's like, nah, I'm not interested in that.
Well, this is interesting because I look at his Wikipedia now, they show him today, wizened and old. He's over 80. And it's clear as I'm reading, the subsequent thing from the documentary, it was clear that he had finally capitulated to some of these money-making schemes. Now, I think obviously when you get older, your needs are more if you have health issues, if you have family, et cetera, et cetera. So there is a mystery that's not solvable to me. Is he really escaping from the money and the commercialism, or is he embracing it now due to his elderly state?
Well, I have not read his, recent Wikipedia entry, so I can't really speak to that.
Yeah.
I do know that there are, I've got like an R. Crumb bookmark that I got at Half Price Books or something years ago. So, but I mean, I think if I had to thread that needle, I would say that there's a difference between, if Lionsgate wants to make a Mr. Natural movie and offers me $1 million, that's one thing. But if he wants to self-publish, I mean, the book came out probably, I don't know if it's 10 years ago now, but R. Crumb's The Book of Genesis, which is
Right.
literally the Book of Genesis from the Bible, this giant hardcover edition that he drew it and wrote it literally. Or there was the R. Crumb Handbook, which came out probably 20 years ago now. I have a signed copy of that from Aline Kaminsky Crumb, his wife, who actually came over from the south of France to promote the book, and I went to see her talk, and
Wow.
it was really cool. So I think there's a difference. Oh, I also have like a signed art print from him because he has a whole website where he'll sell like fine art of his work that he and his son Jesse do together, or at least they did up until a few years ago.
Yeah.
But there's a difference between making money and controlling it versus like, I'm just going to sell these rights over to this corporation and they can do whatever they want with it.
No, I agree. And one of the things in his early career that you didn't mention that I became fascinated with after watching the documentary was his time with American Greeting Cards. I think that was the company. He did 4 years illustrating greeting cards. And I'm like, well, shit, there has to be something on eBay, And I looked and there wasn't. I was surprised. There were some 1960s monster cards he had done, but that seemed to be a separate element from the American Greetings Company or whatever the heck it was called. And anyway, I'm now want to have a R. Crumb illustrated greeting card from the 4 years he was there. That's my new holy grail. Because I'm now back in the cult of Crumb, despite R. Crumb, despite some problematics, which we shall talk about.
Right. Well, I guess I want to get to something. First of all, it may be that you can't find anything on eBay because I imagine if they do exist, they're probably very rare. The people who have them probably have them in a trunk somewhere. They don't even realize it's R. Crumb because he was working for American Greetings. What would be fascinating is if someone could find like in the American Greetings archives, like pick out the ones that he did and put out like a coffee table book or something of like R. Crumb, the American Greetings years or something like that.
Yeah, you'd think so.
Because I imagine if he did it for 4 years, they're probably pretty straight greeting cards. But it'd just be neat to see his style, in a commercial context.
Into that space, yes.
So, and he shares DNA with Andy Warhol, who famously did greeting cards for a long time. So they were almost contemporaries, separated by about a decade. Yeah.
Yeah. Warhol did retail drawings, retail illustrations. He when he broke into New York City, I think he worked for the May store, and he did, if there was a shoe to be drawn, he drew a shoe, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
But here's the question I want to ask you right now. Should we retroactively cancel R. Crumb? And I know that the whole canceling thing is a kind of a sore subject with you, but I also want to know, since we have looked at things in the past, I'll bring up Gone with the Wind. Gone with the Wind sort of canceled right now. Nobody wants to watch that as entertainment. They want to watch it as, well, look at the attitudes that were there. So there was so many problematic things in this thing, and a little factoid that was on IMDb, the sisters did not want to participate because of some allegations. They wanted to file a lawsuit against Robert in the production unless he paid them reparations for his crimes against women. They were ignored, and no legal action was taken. So does that mean there was some family.
Woody
Dallas,
Allen type stuff, or yeah.
well, yeah,
Well, I,
to put a fine point on it, yes.
right. I'm trying to be YouTube friendly here, and I also don't want to
Ah,
say that one way or the other on the Woody Allen thing. But I'm just saying those kinds of allegations, if that's what I'm assuming you're implying.
no, I'm
Um,
not implying that. I'm simply saying they said crimes against women. So I don't think they were saying crimes against them. I think they were
right.
talking about some of the problematics we saw in the film regarding his
Yeah.
depiction of women.
Yeah, and that's interesting because watching this today, it is so 2024. I mean, back in
Yeah,
1994, I would think
prescient.
that yeah, it's everything kind of comes around and all that because there he does have a lot of sexual and very, in a way troubling, but in a way not, like racial stereotypes throughout his work. And it's interesting because they have people who critique it and also people who will defend it, and they're both kind of right
Yeah,
in terms of one racial cartoon that I won't get into the specifics
no,
of. It is
no.
horribly stereotypical and grossly sexual and way over the top, like a lot of his stuff is. But then
Right.
again, the person defending it will say, well, yes, because it's meant to be a lens of how we view certain aspects of different people in the culture.
I do
And I
believe
can
he
I can
made
see
that
that.
same explanation. I'm sorry to interrupt. Yeah, I do believe he made that same uh, explanation when he was describing it. Or boy, he
Hmm.
did his little giggle, so you never know.
Right. But it's
You
also
know,
fascinating because, kind of on a side note, it's around the same time that they have Crumb is at a gallery opening, and I guess the owner of the gallery is talking about like his significance as an artist and all this pretentious stuff, and you can see Crumb I don't know,
well, I
like
did
he
like.
usually.
I believe it was Robert Hughes, the Time magazine art critic, who was
Mhm.
interdispersed. I thought his point of view was very interesting. He considered him one of the most important artists of the last part of the 20th century, which we were only 6 years away from at that point. So what he was saying was, this guy is as significant as any 20th century artist. We just have to view him through a different lens. And again, we're sitting here in 2024, 30 years later, we're viewing it through a different lens.
Right, and there's this one you're talking about the cancellation aspect of it, and
Yes.
I'm gonna try and tie this into it. There is one kind of a deep dive that R. Crumb goes into about the comic that he didn't want to finish. He started out this comic, and I can't remember the title of it, but it was essentially Mr. Natural, this like little old wizard looking guy,
Oh yeah, yeah.
brings brings his I guess to
Uh,
a friend this basically it's a real life kind of sex doll, and it doesn't
right,
have a head, but it's very voluptuous and all this other stuff. He's like, you can do anything you want to it. And halfway through the comic, Crumb realized that he was so disturbed by what he was drawing. He's like, I can't finish this. So he threw it in the trash.
right.
His wife comes in and is asking him like kind of what's going on. He's like, yeah, I had this thing and I just couldn't do it. I don't think it's right. And she picks the pages out of the trash, reads them, and compels him to finish it. And what
Yeah,
he finishes is one of the most disturbing
yeah.
comics I've ever seen, but it
Certainly.
also but it also says a lot about the objectification of women in commercial art, and also the shame that certain, I guess, men can feel in that objectification, because it's not like the people portrayed in this are these macho kind of hero guys. They're all pathetic, like a lot of the people in his art. And from what we see in these interviews and his interactions with ex-girlfriends, we see, yeah, this guy is kind of a creep and a weirdo. He just happens to be one of the most talented artists in history.
You know what's interesting? I think that in the film, we see that both his youngest brother Maxim is Robert older. I think he is, right? Not Robert.
Yeah, Robert's the middle child because it's
Our
Charles,
Crumb,
then.
our Crumb and Charles is Charles and Maxim. We see them, and they're pretty much outside society. They can't function in society, right? So, how did our Crumb function in society? Well, I think one of the keys was I became famous. That line he says in the movie. That's
And he
one of the
hisses it
keys.
too, like you did. There, yeah.
Yeah. And the other key, and that's what I remembered from seeing it the first time. And the second thing is, I think his love of music. It's a survival instinct. the old 78s, his band, everything. He can escape into that, whereas Charles and Maxim both did not create those safety valves for themselves. They got crushed by the initial strain of being in that family. And believe you me, when you have mental illness in a family and then it's crushed by the nurturing aspect of it, it's a lethal combination. You can end up in the hospital, you can end up in an institution. This is what happened. But for our Crumb, luckily for us, I guess culturally, that he survived.
Yeah, and that's the that's the kind of the double-edged sword is
Yeah.
you can watch this documentary and come away from it appreciating the artistry, if not necessarily the subject matter, the commitment to the work, the commitment to not selling out, but also
Right.
think, couldn't this be in the body of someone who is less icky? But the answer is no, because that's sort of the cosmic trade-off, right?
Right. We're all victims of our own circumstances, right? We're
Right.
all victims. And I hate the word victim, but we are. There's no better word for it. And
well, we are the subjects of our own circumstances. Whether or not we choose to be victimized by it is an entirely different thing. But there are many factors in there. I take your point, though. Yes.
Yeah. No, I know you do. So yeah, a very interesting conversation about his past work and all past work. How can we judge things from the filter of where we sit today when we know that the world was a very different place? Now, one of the things that fascinated me about the setting of 1994 is there are no mobile phones in the street, right? Everybody's just walking their normal thing. It was the last golden age, where we were unencumbered by that. But also, he's complaining about the elements of people having stuffed things in their ears and, advertising for, the 49ers, the Raiders, the Nikes, whatever, people wearing advertisements on their shirts. And I'm like, oh man, it just got worse.
Oh yeah, he's living in the south of France now, and
Yes.
that's sort of one of the subplots of the movie is he and Aline are getting ready to pack up and move from
Right.
California to France, and it's fascinating because you talk about selling. He found someone in France who sold him the house for a suitcase full of Crumb's old sketchbooks.
Right. And the guy made the better deal. The guy who took the trunk made the better deal.
Right, but it's one of those. It's almost an American dream story, right? I mean,
Right.
you can make it, and it's not even necessarily about the money. It's about your talent and what people are willing to do for you.
It's all in that sentence, and then I became famous.
Well, I mean, that's the thing. I can only imagine Crumb's head exploding if this documentary were made today. I mean, I don't know if he would be able to. He would have been the guy confined to his house because walking around, people looking into their phones, and how would he react to TikTok, for crying out loud? I don't know.
I'm sure as an 81-year-old man, he's just not even looking at it. So he said something very interesting, which again goes to the prescience of this documentary. The combination, he was talking about America, the combination of utopian hopefulness with Puritan ethics leads to the collapse. Because we can't, in a utopia, get there. Utopia, by its very definition, is unreachable, right?
Right.
And then you combine that with the I'm better than you because I'm Christian, or I'm better than you because I'm this or that or the other thing, in a Puritan sense. It leads to that sexual problematics that both brothers have, that he has, that I have. Everybody who was tortured by that Puritan element has come out. I mean, thank you.
Yeah, I mean, I can see that.
I can confess that now.
Well, no. I mean, here's the thing. Like, I can. I can see this from 1994 and understand that these are kids from the 50s, right? So, and
Yeah.
he very
Yeah.
much
They're,
talks
yeah.
about the kind of the buttoned up repression of the kind of the imaginary ward cleaver lifestyle. But
Yeah.
then if you flash forward 30 years, the opposite of the buttoned up puritanism is the wild anything goes cultural free for all, where there's no such thing as modesty or constraint, and religion is being run out on a rail. Um, so yeah, it's interesting both ways. What was
It deserves to
fascinating,
be run out of the rail. I'm sorry.
I take exception to that, sir. But I will say the I
We'll
guess
agree.
one of the most shocking things is, and I can't remember the name of the publication, but one of his ex-girlfriends who confirmed that our Crumb is, I guess, freakishly well endowed. She
Yes.
ran a magazine, um, and it
Oh,
was kind of
yeah.
like one of these like fetish magazines.
Oh
And
my
there's a
God.
photo shoot where he's,
Uh,
auditioning women with giant legs and butts
yeah.
so that he can ride around on them on piggyback, and like half of them are topless, and I'm just like, they all seem to be into it. And I'm just thinking, like, talk about something that would raise so many eyebrows today. I can't figure out if people would be up in arms because it's sexual exploitation, or if they'd be like, yeah, do your thing, it's sex work is real work, or something like that.
Well,
I don't know where people would land on it.
one of the people I wanted a documentary about was the woman whose obsession with porn led her to edit all these big butt, boob, jugs. I mean, she looked like somebody who was like, could it be a suburban mom? It was hilarious. I was like, who is this person? First off, a woman who is into pornography, I think is very rare. Now, maybe this is my Puritan standard, which I've struggled with. But I do think it's rare because women are not as visual as dudes. I don't know. Again, I'm being very generalizing.
Sure.
If there are gals out there who love their porn, I'm all for it.
It's very generous of you, Pat.
Thank you.
Um,
You're welcome.
no, I mean, but that's the thing is, it's
Speaking
also
of
gets
getting
back to,
canceled.
well,
Sorry.
no, it's there's so much going on inside this documentary
Yeah.
that I think I didn't quite know how to feel about when I first saw it, 30 years ago, because I just want to rewind the tape. My introduction my introduction to Robert Crumb was another documentary called Comic Book Confidential, which came out in
Yes.
the late 80s.
Yeah.
And that
Remember it well.
whole, yeah, it was like the entire linear history of comics up until that point.
Right.
And it was great because I was introduced to so many great people. I was just getting into comics at the time. So like, oh, I got to discover that. What are Underground Comics? And they had a whole thing in there, R. Crumb. He talked about the greeting cards in a bit more depth than he does here. So looking at that and discovering those kind of underground taboos, and the women and all this other stuff, you flash forward to this documentary and looking at the fact that he had trouble forming relationships. I mean, he has a wife and he's got two kids from two different people, but
Yeah.
he talks about being completely incapable of love. And then it gets really, you want to talk about Woody Allen again, no, no judgments, because I don't know where to fall in that case, but he's like, the only person I could ever like fully love and adore or give myself to is my daughter. And then cut to like him, like really cuddling and snuggling. And I don't know if it's the context of all the other stuff going on in the documentary, but it's just like, it just looks strange. And maybe it's just because he is so uncomfortable a person to look at in that light. They're like, I don't know, maybe that just is him. It's fine.
R. Crumb had the lethal combination of being sexually attracted to women in almost an obsessive way. And that has to do with being the nerd and the rejected dude and all that. He went over that. While at the same time, he harbored a hatred toward women because of his mother, because of his previous relationships, because of his rejection. So that combination is kind of psychotic, when you think about it, because you have to, you're attractively want to be with the thing that you most despise, I guess. But I it's part of his mental breakdown a bit, and not attractive at all.
Well, it's he's so kind of detached. I mean, he talks very well. He's fascinating to listen to, especially talking about
Yes.
art and culture.
Yeah.
But then in these scenes where they visit his mother's home and they talk to Charles, and eventually they talk to Charles and mom, there's all this disturbing stuff coming out.
Very
And then the
disturbing.
camera will like pan over to him sitting on the couch, just like, yeah, well, you know.
Well, he also giggles at some point when Charles brings up this horrific abuse that his father gave them. I mean, his father was a goddamn madman. You know, I mean, he not in the advertising sense, in the you need to be arrested and put away sense.
Well, but no, I think there is something to that because when you said madman, I thought of Mad Men because he did at one point. Our Robert brings up a book that he wrote on, corporate culture, or advertising, or something. And you see this
Yeah,
picture in the back, and he might have well been a contemporary of Don Draper. But then he gets
absolutely.
home, and he just
Yeah.
comes in like a lion. He's like beating his kids and all this crazy stuff.
Well, he's talking about the phony smile that the guy always had. He would, when he was in public, he was the glad-handed guy with the smile on his face, and he shows the picture in the book. And they said when he got home, that smile disappeared. I'm like,
Oh,
oh Jesus! I knew so many families like that growing up because I grew up in the '60s and the '70s, and we still had, divorce was not as common, and just horrible family. My best friend had a family that I think about now, and I'm like, how did you survive, dude? So anyway,
well, and that's the other thing that really stuck out to me is, and this is the genius I think of Zwigoff and his documentary filmmaking, especially in this case,
yeah,
is he allowed Crumb and his family to talk, and they had all these vivid memories of all these incidents from their childhood, which is, at this point was like 30 years before. I
yeah,
can't remember stuff from my childhood except like vague impressions. The occasional like core memory, if you want to call it that, stands out, very sharply. But they had all of these stories that they could just like recount. And so
yeah.
you'd
Well,
have
I
this
think if you
narration
had
going
some
on.
vivid trauma, that would
Sure.
stick with you. I mean, we
Right.
had every family has traumatic events in it, right? And
Yeah.
do you tend to remember them? Sure, but if they're not as harsh as others, you tend to say, it was the era or blah.
Well, but what I was getting at is
I'm
they'll
sorry.
have no, no, it's fine. They'll have narration of Robert or Charles, not so much Maxon, I don't think, but talking over illustrations from Crumb's work.
Yeah,
And then you realize, oh, these aren't, things that he made up out of whole cloth. Like there's a whole
right.
series of Charles in high school and the bully named Scutch. And then later
Uh,
on, you see Scutch appear in a totally different context as
yeah,
like
it
the
was on a
villain in another Crumb comic.
tattoo on somebody's shoulder.
Right.
Yeah,
And so it's like you've got these illustrated memories instead of like flashbacks or home movies or something. You've got people narrating these stories, and then you see the stories on these comic pages.
suddenly I've frozen. Oh, there I am. I'll just bring up a quick anecdote about my family. Um, uh, my sister and my father used to have drag out beat down fights, slamming doors, bad things said to each other, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, nothing like call the police, but
Right.
I froze again. But uh, they completely revisionized history on it. I brought it up and I'm like, they're like, oh no, that never happened. And I'm like, are you crazy? I witnessed it, bro. To my dad. But this is what I'm saying. This is the traumatic points become vivid in your mind and stay with you. And if you happen to have mental illness in your family, as obviously the Crumbs did, all of them, dad, mom, I'm sure the sisters, and if you don't develop any kind of survival instincts for it, you're going to capitulate to it, as Maxim and Charles did. And
Well,
who
and
knows
that's
with his son? I don't know. He died in 2017. Maybe he was ill, or I don't know. But who knows? He
yeah.
he was saying his father could never give him affection, so it was the cycle regenerated. You know?
Well, it was, and that's the thing is people talk about love languages and how different people need different things. It's not
Right.
just to some people, it's like saying I love you doesn't mean anything. But if you clean the house, so your wife, when she comes home from grocery shopping or whatever, it's all nice and tidy, that's as good as I love you. I'm just making it up. But
No, but it's
with
true.
with Jesse and Robert, there is a bit of an extended sequence where they're sitting down and drawing together,
Yeah.
and they've got the same old photograph, and there's one woman, and they're both drawing her exceptionally well, but
Yeah.
there's something different about Crumb's drawing that is more interpretive and less literal than Jesse's. And even though there's a bit of cheating, as he calls it, there's that little bit of a smile, and he talks about, like, because these were all photos of women from mental institutions or something. And he
Yeah.
said, this lady, you can just tell there's something in her that she's defying her circumstance. And I just wanted to capture that. And sure enough, you look at it, and it's almost like just a difference of a couple of hash marks, but he captures that so well. That I feel like was him. I'm psychoanalyzing him, saying, I love you to my son by spending time with him, teaching him
Oh
what
yeah.
he knows, trying to put a little bit of himself into the next generation. Is very sweet.
When you're incapable of connective tissue, I think a lot of actions, as you just was talking about, the love examples that people have are the substitute, or it's money, or it's I mean, uh, there are different ways of expressing love and affection, and if families establish that, that's them, baby. Everybody has a different personal inner relationship, and connective tissue is very, very important. And if you don't feel like you're getting that affectionate connection, that becomes problematic. It really does.
And it's strange because you're talking about love. I mean, Robert's relationship with Aline, they don't get too much into it, but they both seem
Right.
to be the same kind of person, both very kind of misanthropic,
Right.
disenchanted. I won't say bitter because that implies like a resentment. They seem to be fine, just kind of like hating everything, but loving themselves and I guess their daughter. It's not really about them, the movie, but we do see glimpses of it. And it's
Well,
just,
they've also had a pact to, if you want to go out on somebody else, go ahead. I don't know.
yeah. uh, I guess, but what's striking to me, and I wish that we could have gotten a bit more into it, is when you look at Aileen's drawings, because she's an artist in her own right, you're like,
Right.
oh, it looks almost like, I'm just making a backstory in my head. It looks like she was a fan of R. Crumb and aped his style, and then one day met him and they fell in love because there's so much similarity graphically in their work that I'm like, is he helping her out on these or like doing covers or something? And the interior work is different. No, it's all her, but it's like a different take on whatever her husband's doing. And that's not to take away from her achievement because
No.
doing even that is very difficult because she also does these autobiographical things, and there's some funny stories that she tells that are funny, horrific about her own family.
Right.
But watching it this time, I noticed, oh, there's similarities in both the person and in the creative output.
Well, and another thing that I remembered from the first viewing that again was starkly realized in this second viewing is that the madness of Charles and how he kept evolving and how his pictures became like these squiggly. I don't know. That was really bizarre. So like everybody became the Michelin Man, and then it got to be all dialogue, and then the dialogue would take up the whole panel, and then there were no words, there were just scratchings, and you're just like, oh, you
It was like
poor
something out of
man.
The Shining,
Yeah,
because
very much in
at the
real
end
life
he
though.
had. Right, but he had stacks of those composition notebooks, and you'd flip through them, and I think they were all blue ink, and they were all like these little like M squiggles representing words and dialogue, but the entire notebook would be filled up with them. And it wasn't even just like, oh, here's like 3 or 4 little humps, and here's another three. It was almost like he was writing a script in a language we wouldn't be able to understand because it
Right.
looked like it had form, but it was also just complete nonsense.
Well, how often do you get to see a person who is on the cusp of suicide kind of make some explanation about what his life is about? And that's what we see in Crumb. We see a man within 2 years is going to off himself, and also had spoke about offing himself before. So, he's going to complete the journey no matter what you do. And
Right.
sadly, who knows what drugs he was on? Lithium? I don't know. Good Lord.
I don't know. And that's the other thing, is like he was also living with his mom. I don't know if the mom was still alive, or she, because she was pretty old at this point
Yeah,
anyway.
she must be gone.
But it's just it didn't seem like a healthy. At one point when they're all sitting on the couch, she's like, "Well, at least Charles isn't out doing drugs or
Right.
marrying some poor woman and making her life miserable." I'm like, wow, thanks, mom.
Yeah. Well, also too, there you go. The utopian hopefulness meets the Puritan ethic. The mother, despite her own drug addiction, well, I'm implied. I don't know if she was actually addicted, but she was trying to create the Ward Cleaver situation, even though her husband was abusive, even though the kids were weird. You know, why can't we be? Why can't you go and get married? Or what? It's like she's still creating that utopian hopefulness, uh, even though Charles is obviously a lost individual. So, again, it's so good to see something like this again through the eyes of experience. I've had 30 more years of interpersonal relationships and observations of other people's fortunes and misfortunes. And now I'm able to see Crumb again and say, okay, I could see the trees from the forest a bit more. So
There is there is a line where he's talking about being him, and I don't know if it was in the context of fame or something, but he said it really is nothing to envy, which is to say that I don't know if he would have traded his artistic ability for a more normal life, but there is also that sense of, just as a viewer, like, man, I felt bad for him. I don't think he's a
yeah,
monster. I think it
no,
was created, as you say, by circumstance, and he was a victim in some way, but he sort of took his own power by
right,
channeling that into
right.
something that kind of changed the world in a lot of ways.
True. And you noted in his survival instincts, I did not put art on that list. Why? Because art is what he does, art is what he's impelled to do. That's not necessarily a survival instinct, as we saw from Charles, who devolved into chicken scratchings on paper. Before, he was as promising an artist as his brother, if not more so. We don't even know because he just evolved.
Well, I mean, yeah, looking at the comics they drew just even as kids, I can't remember if they said how old they were when they were doing these, but Charles's early drawings were amazing. And I just wonder
Unbelievable.
if that dial in his head or his soul or whatever was just turned, 1 degree to the left or the right, if he could have had the same kind of success, or if he had even wanted it, or if that could have, at least been an outlet to save his life, even if he just drew comics instead of devolving into literal chicken scratch.
Right. I have a
Yeah.
question for you as someone who creates art. Um, I was fascinated by, and I had forgotten about this in the first viewing, but I was fascinated with his collection of just Americana stuff, where
Hmm.
where he would see the lines and the poles and the transformers and the distance that we don't notice in our modern life. I mean, the other day I was walking down the alley. I said, "There's a goddamn a lot of lines here.
Hmm.
If I cut this one, somebody doesn't have cable for 2 weeks." It's just that kind of thing. And do you collect things that you put in your art that like he had that book where he looked, because that photographer he liked, he used to go to the corners and that in the story of America sort of aped that element of it. Again, a very prescient piece of work there. That was beautifully realized too. How it went from bucolic to crass.
Well, I mean, that's in Comic Book Confidential. They actually had that as kind of a scene where they kind of morphed the countryside all the way up to everything's power lines. It was very nice. Whereas, and I think this one, they kind of just showed the
It does it
panels.
to a degree, but doesn't
Right.
do it probably. I'm gonna have to pick up Comic Book Confidential again. I haven't seen that since it came out. So there you go.
Yeah,
That's
wonderful
40 years.
documentary. There you go.
40
Um,
years can go by very quickly.
oh my
So
God. But In terms of is my own stuff, I don't collect that kind of stuff for art anymore because I don't draw in. I draw things every day, but they're like different. They're more personal for my family. But back when I first saw this movie and I was in high school and then getting ready to go to art school, yeah, we had reference books and we'd take things out of magazines and newspapers, put them together in these collections. They were
Okay.
called morgues. They
Ah,
open up the drawer and pull
sure.
stuff out, and
It's
yeah,
like the a newspaper morgue, right?
exactly. So,
Yeah.
yeah, I very much was in tune with that. I recognized a lot of that. I mean, the one thing I wish, and I understand the movie had two jobs to do: one, explain who Crumb is and why he was important, and also kind of get into the psyche. But I almost wish there was more about like process, and that's just me being
Yeah.
selfish. I could
Well,
watch that guy draw
yeah.
for just an entire 3 hours.
Well, I found a really good Ebert story. I don't know if you encountered this, but Ebert kind of started a rumor that uh, you know Zwigoff was going to commit suicide, and he begged Crumb to do this film to prevent him from committing suicide. Because during that time, it was his lowest point in his life. He's trying to get funding for it. In fact, he even reached out to Terry Gilliam because Gilliam had worked with Crumb. You know what Gilliam did? He reached in his pocket, gave him a nickel, and walked on. So obviously, not a good experience with our Crumb from the great Terry Gilliam. So it's just so Ebert started this rumor, and then it turned out that he modified it to say it never happened, but it may be true that Zwigoff was saved. His life was saved because he did make the film.
Um,
6 of one, half dozen the other.
well, I mean, I'd like to believe that's true because that's a great story.
Right, right, right.
Didn't I'm,
No,
I'm
that
trying
was
to
in
think.
IMDb, so I don't know if it's true or not.
Well, it's a legend and a legend.
Right, legend wrapped with a legend, exactly.
But I mean, thank goodness that Zwigoff did stick around because 5 years after this, he made Ghost World, and then
Yes.
in 2003, he made one of my all-time favorites, Bad
I was
Santa.
going to ask about that.
Yeah, we got to talk about Bad Santa on like one of our Christmas movie
Oh,
anniversaries at some point
Jesus.
because wow.
That's a tough one for me, man, because I'm a romantic when it comes to Christmas, and there's no romance in that film whatsoever.
Come on, Lauren Graham and Billy Bob Thornton in the car.
And I know what it was trying to do, but for me, it's a different kind of attitude toward the sea season. So, um,
I'm going to get you on the couch for that one at some point.
ah,
We'll talk Bad
if you want
Santa.
to do December, I'm in. But also, I wanted to mention too that I would assume our next one's going to be the Kennedy assassination film in November.
Of course.
So I'll give you some choices and let you decide. But that would be. It's always fascinating to me to give something that I know a lot about to somebody else and see how they react to it. Because
Well, well, I'm all for it. It's become kind of a tradition. We
yes, it
talk like
has.
Christmas movies, Easter movies, and Kennedy assassination.
Kennedy assassination movies.
Oh,
Oh yeah, that's what you can expect on nostalgia, which I didn't get until I looked at like 6 months after we started this. I'm like, oh, that's a pun.
all right. Well, Pat, thank you for hanging out and talking
Always
about
pleasure.
Crumb. It's really cool to revisit, even though I'm not saying I don't like the movie anymore.
Right.
It's just that watching it again through the lens of someone who's much older now, got my own kids, thinking about things in kind of a different way.
Sure.
It's like, oh,
Absolutely.
I'm glad I didn't romanticize Crumb as a person. I only zeroed in on the art because otherwise would have been a very different life.
One San Francisco Examiner critic called it one of the greatest films of all time. Best American documentary of all time. I'll give it that. I does it age well? Yes, because it was just of the moment, and it's about
Yeah.
everybody's expression within their interpersonal relationships. So it still resonates. Let me put it that way. It still resonates to me. So we can leave it at that.
No, I think that's good, and I think it's both a time capsule and also kind of a mirror, because as we mentioned with the kind of the sexual attitudes and cultural attitudes and stuff, it's all kind of coming back around, and who knows what we'll think of it in another 30 years. But we'll definitely be
If
thinking about
man
it.
is still alive.
We'll still be alive, and we'll still be reading Crumb comics. That's my prediction, and that's why he can never die. But anyway, Pat, thanks again. HollywoodChicago.com, and what else? What else you got to plug in the last couple minutes? Tell us what are you up to?
We will be doing Judy again in December. I'm going to take a smaller roles in it, but we're going to do that again. And heck, everybody go to the Chicago International Film Festival coming up in a couple of weeks. So that's not my direct plug, but I always enjoy it.
And I'm sure they'll be covering it, so there'll be something to plug eventually.
There you go.
All right. Well, thanks again, Pat. It's been a lot of fun. And folks out there, check out Crumb. Just be prepared. And also check out Comic Book Confidential. Maybe watch that first and get a taste for Crumb. Oh, also, a movie that came out in 2004. Well, no, I was just saying, American Splendor, the Harvey Pekar movie starring Paul Giamatti. There's an actor, and I'm blanking on his name right now, but he played our Crumb because they worked together. That's another very interesting take on it. Far less creepy, but eccentric. Yeah.
The reality is always creepier than the depiction, as we saw from the film Saturday Night, which I saw last night.
You saw? I haven't seen it yet. I'm anxious to see it. But
I saw the Joker today too. I'm sure you're anxious to see that, right?
No. Anyway,
great way to end it. Blessings to everybody.
Blessings.